Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're specifically going to talk about the passing of famous Dungeons and Dragons artist, illustrator Russ Nicholson. So Russ Nicholson passed. He has gone beyond the veil. Hopefully, we'll see him in the cool place. It's very sad. My condolences to his family, and his death prompts a larger discussion, right? So first of all, let's talk about Russ Nicholson for a minute. So where you probably one, you can see Russ Nicholson's art in the thumbnail, and there you could see like a goblin, and you could see that's a perfect illustration of his material. So that picture came, I heard that Russ Nicholson had passed, and incredibly sad. And so I immediately pulled the book off of my shelf that I knew would contain his art, which was the Fiend Folio. So the Fiend Folio is really fascinating. I'm not sure if you know this, but Dungeons & Dragons Fiend Folio is D&D 1E, right? Every single bit of art in it is black and white, because it was, first edition. It was D&D 1E, right? And now we're, 49 years later, we are now at D&D 5e, and that's no small thing. Like, so one of the things is this passing is really big. You know what? Let me get all the way there. I want to just talk about Russ Nicholson's art before I talk about any of the other connected material. Like, there's so much here, right? Like, his passing really makes us think about a lot of things. But he had this incredibly bold, beautiful style. Style of art. And it's really interesting because when Gary Gygax first brought Dungeons & Dragons forward, he really wasn't, for the first 2 or 3 years, he wasn't even hiring real artists. He was hiring people he knew who just had a modicum of talent. But once the Dungeons & Dragons, once this battle station was fully operational, Gary Gygax was like, let's put some money on some real artists here. And Russ Nicholson was a real artist. Now, the Fiend Folio is the British monster manual. That's pretty fascinating, right? Like that there was a British monster manual. Fiend Folio was a failure, and actually the United Kingdom branch of Dungeons and Dragons was shut down, and we never really got any other British anything, right? Like we don't have a British magic item book or a British setting or anything like that. So Fiend Folio is really unique, and you could see just a ton of really stunning, beautiful work that Russ Nicholson did there in Fiend Folio. But it does beg the question of, what could have been, right? So Russ Nicholson has passed. And you could see from his work, he had this really bold, beautiful beautiful style, which was very dark, right? And that's interesting too, because the Fiend Folio came out in 1979, right? So this work was being done in like 1980, 1979, 1978, 1979. And right then, we didn't really know where Dungeons & Dragons was going, right? We didn't know if it would become, and it was already shaping up to be very adult, right? And and you could see that his style is very graphic, right? There's kind of a harsh reality to it, and it was one direction that Dungeons and Dragons could have went, right? He had a very, like, almost a gruesome style. He drew these monsters in a gruesome way, and if you look at the rest of his art in the Fiend Folio and in other books, you could see that he really he had a dark view of the world, and that was part of his artistic vision, right? And one of the things I really like about Russ Nicholson's work, I've been thinking a lot about Dungeons and Dragons, and so Fiend Folio is a D&D Canon hardback, right? So Russ Nicholson helped to make a D&D Canon hardback come to life, right? So actually, Gary Gygax's work is in the Fiend Folio, right next to to Russ Nicholson illustrations, right? So when D&D canon is communicated to us, it's communicated in an intellectual manner with the text, right? The text of a monster. But it's communicated to us in an emotional manner, right? through the art. And that thumbnail that you saw, right? That was a picture taken right out of my Fiend Folio. I took that like today, to show you what this man's life was, which was illustrating for Dungeons and Dragons, and really, and I think that was the highlight of his work. That's where his work is celebrated most. And one thing that's really exciting to me is everybody that comes in through Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, once they actually start, dedicate themselves to the path of Dungeons and Dragons, to start down that Dungeons and Dragons path, they're going to encounter his work. They're going to remember him, right? And it does prompt a question for me, like, what do we do now, right? Where do we go now, right? And that is a really fascinating question, because, like, I don't like the idea that we won't get to see any more of his work, right? And it's possible that we could get to see more of his work. One of the things that could be done is any and all of his illustrations could be brought forward and put into brand new 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Canon hardbacks. And the great thing was we would get to see what his work would have looked like in color, right? So we could simply, literally represent his work colorized, or we could set an actual, a born artist to recreate his work in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to honor him, or a made artist, an AI, to recreate his work and put it in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Both of those second part, any and all of those last, would, I think, require the permission of his estate, right? Of the people who, the people who control his estate. And just like Tolkien, everything that happens with his work goes through the family now. This would need to go through Russ Nicholson. And one of the things I think, too, that I'm hoping they're starting to think of with Dungeons & Dragons is every D&D Canon hardback, these are works of art that worthy of provenance for literally every single instance and iteration of them. And so I'm hoping that going forward, the contracts will make it very clear what the artist's full ramifications are for the work going forward, whether when they die, their material, their style can continue to be put into D&D now, where it's fresh and where it's relevant, right? So I'm really curious what they'll do with this. What I would love to see is, I would love to see them, talk to the estate, get permission, and then be allowed to put all his original drawings into D&D 5th edition material, but it would be in full color. Because that's another thing that we now realize with the passing of Russ Nicholson is these days of 100% black and white art are over. And now we've graduated to 100% full art, which is really powerful and fresh and new and exciting, right? So I'm hoping that we get to see some Russ Nicholson art in 5th. That the passing will now allow his style to flourish. And you're like, Scott, he's passed. Like, often when you pass, that's like literally the explosion of your artistic style, right? Archie, I was a fan of Archie when it was, and the guy who drew Archie was like, we're just gonna make these crusty old comic books. And the moment he died, we got like Archie versus Predator, we got Riverdale, and there was an explosion of Archie material, and we got an American King Archie. So like all these amazing things can often this is one of the things that really makes me fascinated by Gary Gygax is you don't stop talking when you're dead. In fact, I think some of your most powerful messages come, and your most powerful messages are shouted from your grave rather than when you're on this side. So take a look, pull your copy of the Fiend Folio off the shelf and take a look at Russ Nicholson's amazing work, and let's take a minute to remember him. And hopefully he'll be honored, this year by some of his material coming over in full color to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing and have a wonderful millennium.